All right, I think we're gonna kick it off. So, welcome to Lean Startup Your Life. I don't know how much you guys know about Lean Startup or about what you're actually doing right now in life. So, maybe before we jump into the things that I have to say, can we try to do one sentence introductions in the chat session? So, try not to say what you do, try to say something about who you are. I'll start off with mine, and then if you just want to jump in and then introduce yourself in one sentence as well, that would be really helpful. So let me start with mine. I frequently introduce myself as a storyteller and closet trading fanatic. Right. If you guys want to each jump in and give me your one sentence intros, don't be shy. Give you about a minute to come up with them, and then I'll jump into lean startup in your life. I like it. Serial entrepreneur. Garden geek. Ooh. I feel like this is such an interesting group of people. We should just have everybody up on stage to share. Um, Great. So as people come in, they can keep dropping their one sentence descriptions in the chat. But what I wanted to speak to you about today is about how when you decide to become an entrepreneur, and Stephen, you might know this too, it's a lot less about what you're going to do with your job and much more about how you're going to set up your life. And so a lot of the way I've approached how I want to build up my life is using the lean startup methodology. And if you're all familiar with the lean startup methodology, let me know and I'll skip over it. But if you're not as familiar with it, the lean startup methodology was popularized in 2011. And the idea is that instead of spending millions of dollars in building this product and then going out and trying to get people who want it and then iterating, then the idea is that you start off beforehand and start talking to your customers to figure out if this is something they even want. So what's interesting about this methodology is it flips the question on its head of, instead of asking, can this product be built? You ask, should this product be built? And then you go through 3 stages to try to figure out the answers to that question. So the first one is, instead of writing the classic business plan, you write down your set of hypotheses or your best guesses that you need to validate to check if people even want this thing you're building. The second step after you've got your hypotheses is to go out and speak to different customers. And the idea there is you validate your different hypotheses, you understand more about them, you understand more about the problem, and that gives you a better understanding of what it is people want. And then step 3 is agile development, where you go ahead and build the thing you think people want and then try to grow it. But instead of building everything at once, you build what's called the MVP, the minimum viable product, and hope that that works. And in case it doesn't work, you take the feedback and iterate. So this is the lean startup framework. And what I wanted to talk about today was about how you can apply that lean startup framework to your life. And you can apply to different areas of your life. You can apply to your dating life, you can apply to your career, you can apply to your fitness routine. It's just a super effective framework in figuring out how to best optimize your lifestyle. And so I'm going to use the example of my career and how I ended up with the company I have right now based on the lean startup framework. And then maybe with each phase, share one tool with what's useful, because what I frequently find when I was in the other side of webinars like this during my time in college or at college entrepreneurship conferences is that people say a lot of things like find your purpose and go out and meet all of these amazing people, but they don't often tell you how to do it. So I'm hoping that with each part of the story, we can pause and talk about a different tool. So to introduce myself based on what I do, I run Lumhaa, the memory jar company, which is a company that I founded in college and then worked after. It makes products like these memory jars, and you can fill them with photos, videos, voice notes, and things, and you can also do that digitally. So I'm not sure if this resonates with you guys, but I imagine it does for college students, especially in that you often don't know what you want to do with your life. There are so many different options. There are so many things you find interesting. There are so many things you want to learn about. There are at least 100,000 things you can go on and do. And half of the jobs that you can take up in the future don't even exist as of now. So how do you go about finding what the right fit is for you? How do you lean start up your life? I had the same question when I started college, and the first thing that I did, and if you have similar questions like this also, I don't know what I want to do with my life, is to maybe sit down and make a Venn diagram. So in this Venn diagram, I would recommend having 3 separate circles, and you trying to figure out the center of the Venn diagram is likely what's going to help you figure out your set of hypotheses. In these 3 circles, the first circle, you should probably have what your passions are. What is it that you really, really care about? In the second circle, I would recommend having what are you really, really good at? Or what are some skills you would like to acquire? And then in the third circle, I would recommend having what are some problems you care about? What are some ways in which you want to add value to society? So I would make this Venn diagram, and you'll have a few things that are at the intersection of all 3 of these circles. And that is where you start your set of hypotheses for what it is you should probably go on to do in your life. Now, these could be things that you could develop into companies. These could be different job prospects. These could be different hobbies. It could be anything. So to put it in perspective, during my days in college, in my what am I good at section, I had storytelling because I'd written a few novels before. I had finance because I'd loved all of the talk about market. And I had conversations with people and just empathic listening, which if you're a design thinking junkie, that'll make sense to you. If you're confused about it, drop in the chat and I'll stop. So that was my circle of what I was good at: storytelling, finance, and design thinking. And then in my circle of what I was passionate about, I had, again, storytelling. I had, believe it or not, investment banking. And then the third thing I had for what I was passionate about was sports, because I always loved watching sports and participating in them and playing them and everything. And then in my third circle, for the things that I wanted to contribute to, one was this general sense of happiness. I don't know if you guys felt this way too, but I feel like a lot of people in our generation have struggled a lot with anxiety and depression. And for me, it was more melancholia, but it was definitely a sense that existed all through college. So I wanted to be able to find something that helped with that sense. And then also a sense of loneliness. And so I wanted to find something that was an intersection of what I thought I was good at, or what I would have learned more about, what my passions were, and then these problems that I wanted to solve. And so I had my list of hypotheses that these are some industries and some things that I needed to try out. Now, when you're a college student, customer development, quote unquote, can be really hard. And I feel like this gets truer as you go into your adult life, where networking is a really hard thing to do unless you have this amazing network of college peers and alumni. But even then, it can be really, really challenging to do. So how do you go ahead and network? The most effective ways that I've found, one has been to ask friends or family if they know anybody specifically in that industry. Like when I was super interested in trying things out in finance, I asked my parents and my friends and family if they knew anybody in finance who would let me do an apprenticeship with them. And then they immediately thought of connections and then helped me get connected there. Another effective way is if you're a part of a sports team or a club in school, reach out to the alumni of that club. So I reached out to my theater company alumni. I reached out to my sports team alumni and tried to ask them if they could arrange for just a day of shadowing where I could go and see what that job was like. And so try to set up these different opportunities for you to go and try out what all of these different things look like. When it came to building new businesses for the serial entrepreneurs in the room, if that's an industry you're interested in, then ask if you can spend some time with a company that does that. Like when I knew I was interested in the wellness space, I reached out to every single startup in the New York area in the wellness space and said, hey, can I come and spend a day with you? Especially if you ask them about how you can help them get more publicity. For me, it was by publishing about them in the school newspaper. That's always a good thing. So once you've got your list of hypotheses, mine your entire network, your family, friends, sports clubs, peer companies, everything, to try to figure out how you can spend some time just shadowing. Don't ask for the internship straight away. And then after that, once you sort of understand a little bit more, figure out what you want to do an internship in. So to tell you a little bit of a story, my freshman summer, I wanted to see what it would be like to be in finance, but also to be in writing. And so I mined my network and spent some time shadowing people in finance. But then I also was writing this book about terminally ill kids below the poverty line in India. And the idea there was the book would get published and all of the money would be used for their treatment. And so this was my trial of what if I did finance and writing at the same time, because you shouldn't have to choose if you don't want to choose. And the finance apprenticeship was interesting. It was in India, and I figured out I didn't want to work in finance in India. Maybe I would try it in the US later. But what happened when I was working on the novel about the terminally ill children was I spent so much time with them. And unfortunately, a lot of them ended up passing away before the book could even come out. And so I went home and I had all of these drawings from the kids and these photos and these videos, and I filled them all in these glass jars and sent out these glass jars to the families. And they really, really appreciated having these glass jars. And from there, I knew I was sort of on to something. So this is my freshman summer in college. My sophomore year, I did the same thing with the army units in India. And one thing that I would recommend is shoot your shot when it comes to networking. Yes, it is valuable to go through different connections, but sometimes a cold call works also. So this is more of the MVP testing phase, where you're going out and getting all of these internships and all of these different experiences and testing out, does this thing even work for you? And so I was in my MVP testing phase of my startup without even realizing it, by doing all of these cold calls and reaching out to people. But I didn't think very much of this memory jar idea. I thought of it as something recreational. And so decided to spend my sophomore summer being a full-time writer, because aside from trying to figure out what industry you want to be in, it's worth figuring out how much time you want to spend on each thing, right? Because I think in the olden days, we used to talk about a career ladder and how you could keep ascending it. But I feel like nowadays it's much truer to think of it as a career jungle gym, where you can be in a bunch of different industries at the same time and jump between them. And maybe you could be a writer by day and a trader by night, or you could be a dancer in the day and you could be, I don't know, a pharmaceutical CEO at night. And you could be anything and in any proportion that you want it to be. So while you're also figuring out which space it is you want to enter, I think it's worth thinking about what you want your life to look like and how you're going to balance all of these different things. And so my freshman summer, I'd done the summer where I did writing and finance together. And so my sophomore summer, I said, what if I did writing full time? Because that experience of my freshman summer was so incredible and so foundational. And so my sophomore summer, I spent it as a writer, and I wrote an entire novel, but hated the experience because it was super lonely and isolating. And I realized that I really, really wanted to work with a team. And so my junior year through college, I continued working on memory jars for different people, but again, didn't think of this as being a serious business or a serious idea, because to me, entrepreneurship at that time always felt like something people who couldn't get into Wall Street did. So I shunned the concept, which I know I feel like I can feel the virtual gasps from this audience, but I never thought highly of entrepreneurship at all. I didn't even know what it was really. And so I just continued working on the memory jars through my junior year. And then my junior summer, I decided to spend the full summer in finance, because like I said, I was interested in finance and writing, and I'd done finance and writing, and I'd done writing in finance, and I absolutely loved it. It was a summer on Wall Street, and the people were incredible. And one thing that I'd recommend, if any of you have internships that you're looking to turn into full-time positions, is first of all, interview the firm the way they're interviewing you, because they might be prestigious or they might not be, but you never know what's a good fit for you until you ask them the hard questions. And for me, some of the questions were like, how much autonomy am I going to have in this role? Realistically, you're just starting out, so you might not have a ton, but a sense of autonomy and letting me be was super important, because I knew that that was what I needed to be able to work in a setting. So that's one thing I looked for in a manager. A sense of loyalty and mentorship was important, because In my first few roles, I thought that I just wanted to go out and learn. So I wanted somebody who would be able to teach me something. So have your list of things you want to learn from your first boss or from your first company, and make sure you optimize for that. And only take the full-time role if those things exist. So after I did my junior internship in finance, I really loved it. I knew I wouldn't be able to work on finance full-time, as in I would need something on the side that would help me have a little bit of a creative outlet. But I thought that, okay, finance is something I'm going to come back to full-time after college. And then my senior year happened. And in college for us, we had to do senior theses during our senior years. And by then I was so obsessed with this idea of memory jars because I'd been making them for so many people. And I got to hear the most incredible stories about these memory jars that I decided to do my psychology senior thesis on the benefits of these memory jars, because everybody who I sent them to just loved having them. I would get calls from the parents of these terminally ill children that I'd spoken to saying, you brought our children back to us. And I would get calls from the Army unit being like, this is effective. I spent some time at the UN and they also really liked it. So I was like, I wanted to understand more about why that worked. And so I decided to turn to science. I did a bunch of experiments about the benefits of memory jars. And when I found that these memory jars made people happier and less lonely, I decided to create a company out of it. So this is the situation I found myself in. I had committed to a full-time job on Wall Street. I had a startup company that was just starting to take off based on my research. And I had no idea whatsoever about what made sense to do there. And so I realized that I needed to keep storytelling and my company and finance in my life in some proportion. And so I would spend the next 3 years sort of figuring out what the correct proportions were there. And all of this is said in retrospect. At that time, I didn't have the foresight to do this, but if I did, I would have definitely planned it out better. So my first idea was, let me try to do finance as my full-time day job and have my company as my evening side hustle, and then do my writing stuff on weekends. And that worked for a year. And I say worked very loosely because it involved 18, 20-hour days and barely eating or sleeping or speaking to people in the family or anything. So it was definitely an adventure, and I'm super grateful for it because I think it shaped me in so many ways. But I realized that it wasn't working, especially because I felt like I was spending 80% of my time doing something that only gave me 20% joy, 20% of my time doing something that gave me 80% joy. And so the proportions had to change. And so I decided to leave my Wall Street job and make finance and trading a sort of side thing and increase the amount of time I spent on entrepreneurship and on my writing career. And so this was hypothesis number 2 of what if entrepreneurship was the main thing and finance and writing was on the side. And so I ended up co-founding another company that made cognitive tests for athletes to help pro teams pick people. And if you want to know more about that, drop in the chat. Happy to talk more. But then I was running 2 companies as CEO and writing on weekends and then doing finance whenever I felt like it. And this felt like a better fit for me because I was getting the people interaction that I missed when it came to writing. I was getting to create something that I missed when it came to finance. And I was getting to work on my passion project, which was these memory jars. And that also gave me the intellectual edge I wanted from all of my research. And so this kept working until I came to the point fairly recently, just a couple of months ago, where I said, okay, time to make more changes in how we set up our life model. And I decided that I wanted to focus on just 1 or 2 things, because from having multiple numbers of projects over the years, I felt like I was most productive when I did 2 things at once at max. And so decided to let go of one of my companies and focus on only one so I could maintain writing in a bigger proportion as well, because I have a new book coming out, so I wanted to finish that. And so now we're at the point where I'm able to work almost full-time on this memory jar company with my writing on the side. And what I was able to do in this memory jar company is bring in the psychology interest to the research, bring in the storytelling because it helps people collect their memories and tell stories, and also add in the business part, the business model and everything. All of this is to say that this approach of combining everything into one company or one project might be the way you want to go if you figure out what it is you're interested in. Or maybe you want to have all of them be separate into separate buckets and figure out how you want to spend time on them. Maybe you put your passion project on the side and you have practical things for which you need to work a full-time job, none of that really matters as much as you doing what's true for you. Because when I was in the position of having to choose between my full-time job on Wall Street and my startup, everybody told me I had to choose, which in retrospect I did, but I wasn't ready then to make a decision. And the Wall Street people kept telling me, why do you want to be so happy and have your own company? And you should totally come here. And this is where all of the glamour is. And this is where you learn things. And then the people in the startup community were like, if you go to Wall Street, you're selling out. You're never going to be taken seriously in this. You're not committed to your idea. And you don't have to choose unless you're ready to choose. And you can do them in different proportions. And so that is just something that I hope you take away from this, which is you don't have to choose unless you want to. And before you even make the choice, it's worth thinking about, is this something that matters to me? Should I be doing this? And don't be afraid to test things in your life the way you would test them with your business. So I'm going to stop talking now. That was a lot of information. If anybody has any questions, I'd love to hear them. Feel free to drop them in the chat session. Or if you want to hear more about any of the businesses or sports or anything. Thank you for your questions. The hardest part for me in choosing which passions I wanted to focus on, the hardest part was hearing from everybody that I had to choose. There wasn't a single person in my whole life, well, except for one, who told me that I could do multiple things at the same time. Everybody said you have to do finance, or you have to do writing, or you have to do entrepreneurship. And I just wish somebody told me that you can find a way to make them work in different proportions, or that you can combine them all in a way in your own business that scratches all of those itches. So just all of the different people telling me that I couldn't make them all work at the same time made me doubt myself a lot more than I wish I had. Challenges in this pandemic. I feel like the pandemic is just a giant challenge in itself. There were two separate challenges, and one was professional and one was personal. The professional challenge was that for our business, a lot of our revenue came from doing in-person memory jar making events. And all of a sudden, overnight, you just didn't have in-person events at all. And so we lost our entire revenue stream. And how we overcame that was just by having a phenomenal team that was dedicated to making the business work. And so they went out and spoke to people and figured out that people still wanted the memory jars, they just couldn't make it themselves. And so we pivoted from being an event-driven business to being a physical product business, where instead of having people make their jars themselves, we made the jars and shipped it out to people. So it was a lot of thinking about what revenue streams make sense and how we should pivot to meet the challenges of this. On a personal level, of course, there's a lot of, I don't know if this is ever going to end. I don't know how I'm going to balance mental health. I don't know if I'm getting sick. How do I stay in my apartment without going crazy? So there was a lot of, you need to keep yourself motivated. And for me, I would often find myself not being able to stick to a schedule, which meant that some days I would just not be as productive as I needed to be. And one thing that really helped was setting an early workout with my trainer. So I box. So making sure that I get to the boxing ring every day at the same time, and my trainer is holding me accountable. So after that, the whole day would flow properly. So just having that one set thing that doesn't change in your schedule, I think made everything else a lot more productive. Thanks for the question, Natasha. Okay, how did I push myself to stay motivated after a long day of work at my side hustle? Oh my God, this was so hard. I can't tell you the number of days where I came home from the bank at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning and sat down on broken cardboard boxes in my kitchen, eating frozen pasta sauce and rice because none of the food was open, even though it was New York. And everything was just shut, and I had to stay up and work on my side business. So it was really hard. But I think there were two things that kept me motivated through it. One was accountability, in that if I didn't do my job at the end of the day with the startup, then all of the people who were working on product development in the startup wouldn't be able to do their jobs the next day, because they needed me to approve things, or they needed me to design things. And so there was just this immense sense of, if I can't take out this half an hour to just do what it is the team needs me to do, then their 24 hours are going to go to waste. So that feeling, I think, got me through a lot of it. The second thing that I think got me through a lot of it was honestly my family and some of my friends from college who were so invested in this idea of seeing me happy and this idea of me seeing these things that I dreamt about come true, that they would often ask me about it on phone calls. And that initially used to create a lot of guilt when I didn't have any new updates to give them. And so just knowing that I would speak to my family or my friends and they would ask me about an update on Lumhaa motivated me to have an update to give them. And so to do a certain amount of work. So these were the two sort of extrinsic motivators that I had in place that I was really lucky to have, because my internal motivation definitely fluctuated a lot. I love the company, but it was really hard after a lot of long days of trading to be focused on it. So set up external accountability, super helpful. These are great questions, thank you. I'm also curious about the most insightful thing each of you took away from this event today, since this is the last session. If people just want to drop in what they learned so the other people here can learn also, that would be really cool if we can share our knowledge. My favorite takeaway from today's event, for what it's worth, was of thinking of pitches as poetry. I thought that was really cool. You can do multiple things you love in life. I love that. I'm so glad that was a takeaway. So important. I wish there were more people encouraging other people to do what it is they love rather than what it is they wish they did. Oh, you guys are really sweet. Thank you. Yeah, anytime anybody feels like they're being forced to choose, you guys have my contact information. Give me a call. I'm very serious. Nothing upsets me as much as people having to give up on things they care about because they can't be multiple things at once. All right, I think that's the end. Thank you so much for staying for this session and for coming to the conference today. I loved your questions. I loved meeting each of you. And if any of you want to drop by or say hi, you know where to find me. Take care.